This week's episode of Edges and Sledges is brought to you by Seat Tires, and we wanted to tell you a little bit about their Secura Drive and their puncture-safe tires.
For those of you who drive, Seat Secura Drive is a tire with an added layer of safety, offers a much higher degree of control and grip even at high speeds.
And for those of you who ride, Seat's premium puncture-safe tires, as the name suggests, are less prone to flats and leaks. I mean, whoever has the time to deal with annoying flat tires, right?
And now onto your show.
Hello and welcome to this midweek episode of the Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast brought to you by Seat Tires. This is DJ and I'll be your host for this episode. Now, if you haven't heard our regular Monday episode, which wraps the India versus England Test series, please do go back and hear that. That's episode 160. The T20s will kick off on Friday this week and we will be back next week to cover those. But in the meantime, to tide you over, we've got a really special episode lined up, right? We've heard a lot in the media recently about mental health and the mental challenges faced by cricketers. We've even heard about the mental challenges faced by members of the royal family recently, Meghan and Harry. So what better time to drop this episode, right? So we had a chat with Jeremy Snape. Now, those of you who've watched cricket in the 2000s know Jeremy as an England cricketer, an off-spinner, an all-rounder. Jeremy's also been involved with coaching roles. He's worked with the South African cricket team as the performance coach. He's also been part of the first team that won the IPL, part of their coaching staff, Shane Warne's Rajasthan Royals. He's also helped Crystal Palace on the football side and England rugby. So he's got a lot of sporting experience and he specializes in sports psychology. So we got an incredible chance to sit down with him and get an insight into what happens in the minds of champions. So we'll go for a very quick Seat strategic timeout and the Jeremy Snape interview will follow straight after this timeout. We are absolutely delighted to have an ex-England cricketer join us on the Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast this week, Jeremy Snape. Jeremy, welcome to the Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast.
Hello, thanks very much for the invitation.
It's super to have you on this podcast. Of course, you've played cricket at an international level. You've played county cricket. You've been coaches of various teams around the world. You're now involved with what is very interesting. It's sports psychology crossing over with high performance coaching. You've worked with Indian businesses as well. So tell us a little bit about how your career has gone to date, your cricketing career as well as your non-cricketing career.
Yeah, well, thanks very much. How long have you got? I was the world's slowest bowler when I played, so it could be quite a long episode, this one. I think I was the journeyman pro pretty much. I wasn't the superstar. I wasn't the Rishabh Pant of my generation. I was the sort of journeyman of being a decent all-rounder in a county team and had some great successes. There were some flashes of genius with man of the match on my England debut and hitting the winning runs in a 2020 final for Leicestershire. So I think there was 8 or 9 trophies during that 19 years. So I was definitely part of some incredible teams, but also some massive failures as well, very public. One game, 2001-2 tour of India, actually, in front of 120,000 people at Eden Gardens, an incredible stadium, before they reduced the seating. I think there was over 100,000 people in there, and it was incredible, bowling at Sehwag and Sachin Tendulkar and, the pressure of those kind of environments. But I guess what fascinated me in that particular game, the run rate was climbing and we were getting towards a tense finish in the game. And I ran out Freddie Flintoff, which is never the best move when you need sort of 10 and over. And there was just me left in the middle of that stadium, that cauldron of noise, 100,000 people screaming. And I had that negative voice in my head saying, you can't win from here. You've never done this before. You've never won a game for England from this position. And despite being, a decent county pro, that was quite a, big step up for me mentally. And I didn't pass the test, it's fair to say. So I think that moment made me realize that often the biggest difference between our best day and our worst day is in our mind. So I became fascinated about that. I went on to play for England again and did okay. And won lots of trophies again after that. And I went and studied a master's degree in sports psychology because I thought, if this is the biggest part of the game, most players would say when you get to the top level, 90% of it is mental. And I thought, well, if that is the case, and if I've experienced this in my own career, how come no one's really coaching it and talking about it? And we spend hundreds of hours in the nets training, but we spend relatively little time talking about the mental preparation. And having just seen the England, tour of India with, the brilliant Patel and Ashwin bowling spin, the pitches exploding, the fielders are around the bat, and you can feel that suffocation that the Indian team are able to put onto those batsmen that were tentative and, wondering whether they should leave the crease or attack. So you could see that as much of that was, as much as it was a technical interrogation, it was also a mental interrogation. And I think probably the two biggest mental tests in cricket are facing fast bowlers on a fast and bouncy wicket, and facing spin in the subcontinent with men around the bat. And those two are massive mental challenges. So I did my master's degree at university, carried on playing for a while, and then I got a chance to work with Shane Warne and Rajasthan in the first Indian Premier League, which was, incredible. The tournament never existed. Then I got a chance to work with South Africa and worked with them for 4 years. And then went to work with Sri Lanka during the World Cup 2015, Premier League soccer teams in the UK, England rugby, and then lots of businesses as well. And I think what I found across all the different sports and businesses is that our mindset is the next frontier. We all talk about skill set, we all talk about fitness, we all talk about analysis, but actually in both business and sport, if you can get your mindset to the next level, your performance will take care of itself. So that's how I spend my time, interviewing some of the world's best performers, working with them, trying to support them, and then trying to share those insights across business as well. And as you mentioned, worked with some great Indian businesses on mindset, leadership, and culture. So yeah, fascinating area of work. And I think psychology will become an even bigger part of our conversation in society in the next decade.
This is absolutely brilliant. I mean, the insight you can bring to a podcast like ours is just amazing. Having been on the player side of it, now you're on the coaching and performance kind of enhancement side of it. So let's get straight into it. I think my first question, Jeremy, is we see all these young players today, and we see these modern players today. You mentioned Rishabh Pant. We look at Dom Bess. Now, what are the mental challenges faced by young players and players generally in this modern era? I mean, the obvious one is social media, and you open Twitter, and KP's talked about this. When you were doing badly, that blue app went off your phone, and when you did well, you scored 100, you put it back on. So how much pressure does social media and kind of travel and living in a bubble and things play in terms of the performance of the modern cricketer?
Well, I think it's massive, and I was very fortunate to be in the era before I retired in 2008, and it was before everyone turned into a journalist. In effect, everyone's got an opinion on the game. Everyone can take pictures of you out in, bars or having a meal or out with friends or whatever it is, and everyone seems to be, commenting, and a lot of it with social media, as we know, is anonymous. You've got Wickets 27 says this, or Stumper 29 says this, and it's all people hiding behind those sort of pseudonyms to throw their abuse. So I think it's a challenge. It really is for the young players. Now we've got to balance that with the fact that many of them have become, brands that go beyond the sport. If we look at some of the leading sports stars, they've got their own clothing ranges, they've got their own, wine companies or whatever it might be. And that social media platform that they've been able to develop is now being leveraged in a very positive way. And I've also seen in the UK, especially with some of the Premier League soccer players, that, if there's a bit of tension in the ground and the stadium and two rival groups of fans are, causing a bit of a scuffle outside, that, some of the senior players with millions of followers have been able to say, we're okay with the loss today. We'll come back stronger next week. Everyone get home safely. Don't cause any trouble. And of course, that reach right into the hands of thousands of fans and supporters that are, emotionally charged outside the ground can be an incredibly positive effect. So I think there's both sides of it really. And I think one of the mental skills again is to, try and build a very robust sense of self-confidence and self-esteem based on our own goals and what we put into performance. So how I train, how I perform, the decisions I make, the contribution I make to the team, the conversations I have with my teammates, they're all things that I can control, that I can take confidence from. Somebody sitting in a foreign country, sitting behind an egg avatar, having a go at me is part of the territory. But what I've got to do is almost be able to dial down the volume outside my bubble, my psychological bubble, not my COVID bubble. Well, it could be the same, actually. We dial that bubble, sort of the volume up inside it. So my teammates, my coaches, my parents, my partner, they are all the people that I really listen to at 80% volume. And then I make sure that I turn down the, social media keyboard warriors down to 20%. Now, we'd love to say, don't listen to that at all. But, everyone listens to it. We're all human and we've all got that sort of frailty and sensitivity. So you're bound to go and look for those things. But I guess you're never going to be able to please everybody. So focusing on your game plan, your development, and your learning, actually, that's one of the key things, because cricket is such an outcome-driven sport. England lost the series. You scored 27 runs in 3 innings. Now, those statistics make it so transparent that there's no place to hide, which again can be brilliant when you're doing well and you've scored 70% of your team's runs and you're on fire, and that's fantastic. You can see your strike rate, all those things. But when you're being exposed because you're underperforming, that's when problems start to come in. So again, making sure that you have a rounded view of what you're offering to your team, to your community, to your family. That's where we need a sort of a more balanced portfolio of confidence, rather than just, if I score 100, I'm a great guy. If I score 0, I'm a loser. It can't be that binary. It has to be about our contribution and the effort and the learning that we're sort of constantly developing, rather than it just being these sort of fixed scores that define us. So it's a real challenge, but, as I say, the rewards financially, in terms of becoming a global name, that stage is set now, and it goes with the territory.
Absolutely. It's probably changed a little bit since you were playing with the newspapers. I do remember the game at Lord's where Nasser Hussain scored 100 and then pointed at the back of his shirt saying he wants to bat at number 3. I mean, there have been those instances, and I'm sure in today's world it does wear these cricketers down eventually. As you said, we're all human. I mean, the other person that comes to mind straight away after this England tour is someone like Johnny Bairstow, who's travelled all the way. He's been in a bus for 8 hours without being able to go to the toilet and all sorts of odd things, and he hasn't got any runs. And he's one of those people who you can see go kind of up and down quite a lot in some ways. But there have been others who've spoken out more publicly recently about the mental health challenges they've faced. You've got Glenn Maxwell, Sarah Taylor, obviously Marcus Trescothick back in the day. But Jeremy, how hard is it for a cricketer who's, as you say, is somebody who's probably gone through their whole life performing at a very high level, being seen as the special ones, to kind of reach the international level and then realize that while everything is fine physically and technically, their mind just isn't holding up. It isn't helping them achieve the results on the field. So how hard is it for a high performing cricketer to admit that to themselves and then make a public statement?
Well, it's interesting, that phrase, admit it. We've got to admit that we've got a mental challenge. We don't have to admit that we've got a sore hamstring. And I think that's part of it. The stigma of being weak in the mind is something we've got to admit to. And I think this is the next phase for me about talking about mental health and psychology and performance. There's a continuum from mental ill health, where we've got, really negative mindsets, and people need to go with clinical diagnoses and medication, through to the very top end of high performance and being in the zone, many of those skills around self-talk and visualization and self-esteem are the same principles. They just get deteriorated as you go down. And while somebody up here, I mean, as part of my research and work with Sporting Edge, I've interviewed around 100 top performers, Olympians, leading military figures, top business people. Many of them have imposter syndrome. Many of them have sort of, as they come up the slope in their career, they're looking up at these iconic champions and thinking, these guys have got the perfect technique, the perfect family, the perfect financial, income. They never make a bad decision and everything looks right for them. And actually, what I've found is that all of those top performers have vulnerability, have fear, have doubts. I mean, interestingly, on my podcast, I interviewed Viv Richards, and he said on his first test going out to bat in India, he fell down the stairs because he couldn't feel his legs. He was that nervous. Now, this is a man who, if ever there was a superhero in cricketing terms, Viv Richards is that man. I know he's just celebrated his birthday. Viv Richards was the walking aura. He had this incredible confidence. Now, if somebody like Viv Richards was feeling nervous and feeling insecure in those first few innings in India, then that gives permission for us all to feel like that. We are under more pressure and expectation and social comparison than we've ever had through our history as human beings. So now we're starting to, am I good enough compared to those people? So we've got to be very careful that we don't, first of all, elevate people up, whether it's, the family that lives next door, the entrepreneur that's in the next building. They are perfect. They've got everything. And then on the negative side, we criticize ourselves and say, I've got all these worries, I've got all these concerns, I've got all these insecurities. The fact is, it's probably actually quite similar. And when they look across at you, they think you've got it all sorted. So I think the first thing is that our mental health is absolutely fundamental to our well-being, our happiness, and our performance. All three things interlocked perfectly. And I think we're going to see many more people talk about it. I have to say, in the UK especially, people like Marcus Trescothick, Jonathan Trott, we've had Michael Yardy as well, talking about the mental challenges that they put on themselves, the pressure they put themselves under. They've been pioneers, really, for British sport, because the Professional Cricketers Association that looks after all the players is there to support us and is there. So as soon as Marcus Trescothick pulls out from that tour, how hard must that have been for him to say, this isn't a hamstring, this isn't a sort of a technical issue, this is a mental issue. That is a big thing for him to announce back at the time when he did. So I think people like Marcus have been pioneers really in this. And I think it allows us to start the conversation about where's my mindset? Where's my mental well-being at the moment? And on the back of this global pandemic that we've all had, we know that too much novelty, too much uncertainty, and too much uncontrollability. So I don't know what's happening next. I don't know if there's anything I can do about it. And I don't know when it's going to come right. That is the cocktail for the stress response. So we know that there's going to be a mental health sort of backlash from what's gone on because everyone's been in this sort of protected cocoon. And I think we've just got to be honest that some days we have good days, some days we have bad days. Some days I feel when I go for a run, I can run really quickly for 5 miles. Sometimes I get to the top of the road and feel like it's going to be like running into the wind. It's the same mentally. So I think what I've learned, from interviewing the top performers is their self-awareness is very high. They know when their muscles are sore. They know when their confidence is low, and they have the courage. If it's a physical thing, to go and ask the physio, and if it's a mental thing, they'll go and ask one of the psychology team, speak to a friend, speak to an advisor, learn about your mindset. I think, we're all proud. We all want to pretend we're doing it brilliantly. But to me, the strongest people, and I'll repeat it, the strongest people are those that are able to show some vulnerability and talk about their mental health. Because to me, it's the final frontier. We've measured fitness. We've got everyone in an ice bath. We've measured their skin folds and their body fat. We can do that. Now we've got little bits of technology. I've worked in Premier League soccer, and they have a microchip in the shirt and they can track where every player is. We can measure that. The final frontier is measuring what's going on in somebody's head. And unless people talk and be open and authentic about it, we're never going to be able to find out how we can help and inspire and support those people. So I think the mental game and the mental health is a massive thing in society for us. And I think some of our sports leaders are pioneers in making that normal. I talk about my body being fit or being, compromised in certain areas. I should be able to talk about my mindset in exactly the same way. And I think that will come in the years ahead.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. And I think that's recognized in a recent comment that Ravichandran Ashwin made after the test series, saying, I'm happy. I know I'm happy now. There's a thin line between being desperate and being complacent, because the desperation comes from wanting to be competitive, wanting to be better than yourself, wanting to do well. And getting too desperate isn't good for you, and being too complacent isn't too good for you. But he said he was happy, which means he's kind of found that balance. But even someone like him with 400 test wickets said, I didn't know whether I was going to play that first test match in Australia. And that self-doubt that comes with sportsmen, I mean, it's almost amplified by living in this bubble that's only your cricket teammates. Someone like Kuldeep, who goes to Australia, doesn't play a test match for 2 months. I mean, it must be heartbreaking, being in that bubble, being happy for your teammates, but not being in the team. So I guess my question is, life for sportsmen in a bubble, is it, I mean, hopefully it's going to be temporary with vaccinations and things coming out now, and we will go back to a new normal soon. But is it even harder for these sports people to live in a bubble? I mean, it's hard enough for someone like me who doesn't have to face these pressures on a daily basis.
I think it is. And it's a strange irony that Test cricket or T20 cricket or ODI cricket, the hardest test comes out on the pitch. But I think in the recent 12 months, the hardest test has been off the pitch. And that's, every morning waking up in your own bedroom. Sometimes players shared rooms and they're all isolated in their own rooms. They go and have breakfast at their own table for one. Imagine being away from home for months on end and you're not sitting having lunch with people and breakfast with people. Then you go off to the bus, and there's this protocol as you go to the ground. You've got people shoving things up your nose, and that's getting a bit sore because it's happening every morning. Then you go into these sort of clinical laboratories where you're allowed to go in one at a time. It's that kind of thing before you even get to airports and moving between hotels, and having that fear that I'm doing all this, I'm sacrificing all this time away from my family, but that person who cleaned my room, are they COVID free? Or that person who has just put the nets up or threw me the ball back from when it got hit over the boundary rope, have they been tested? And it's that constant uncertainty that, if you see it just as one opportunity, like somebody throwing a ball back, you'd go, oh, don't worry about it, it's just one thing. But when that's happening 85 times a day, day after day after day for 6 weeks, it becomes a real challenge. So you can understand that, for players, they actually just want to get onto the pitch and play, because that's almost the easy part, which is quite ironic, really, when it's called Test cricket.
And it's controlling the controllables, which we'll come to. But you mentioned Test cricket, and of course, the India versus England tour, the Test series has just wrapped, and England lost that 1-3. So, I mean, it's already so hard with this bubble and all the other mental challenges of just playing something that's as hard as Test cricket. But what would go on in a dressing room that's lost such a hard fought series? Because I mean, I think the scoreline says 1-3, but and I don't want to get into pitches and kind of external factors. And to be fair to the England team, they haven't got into any of that. But what would the dressing room chatter be like to come back day after day? And we saw the fight that England showed with the ball. I mean, we saw it all the way to kind of the last test match where they were in it, they were fighting. I mean, you had injured players, you had players being sick, but that fight was in there. So how what goes on in the dressing room when you have to pick yourself up after a hard day of Test cricket, particularly in these circumstances?
Yeah, well, it's obviously devastating, and I think what we've seen, especially in this recent tour, is just the pure intensity of the game. Yes, the pitches have been conducive to that home advantage of playing in spin, which has shortened the game, and that's as much through, England's lack of skill and temperament against that, type of bowling as it is to any, wicket conditions. So as you say, that's the bit to focus on. But if you imagine that during a normal test day, if it's in the UK or Australia or whatever, then we've got that sort of the medium pace bowler or the fast bowler wandering back to their mark, polishing the ball 15 times, flicking the hair to the side, coming in, bowling a ball, the ball carries through to the wicketkeeper, and there's another 30 seconds now before that cycle repeats. In India, we've got that ferocious heat. We've got, Rishabh Pant chirping behind. We've got the two sort of stormtroopers sitting right in front of you, ready to catch and dive in front of you. You've got Virat Kohli, shouting, and Ajinkya Rahane just there to dive and snare you. And, we've got Akshar Patel or Ravi Ashwin spinning around and bowling it again and again and again and again. There's no sort of let up from it. So I think the intensity of those days during this tour will have definitely taken their toll. Okay, sometimes we didn't get past the third day, so there were 2 days off, but still the intensity of those days will have been greater than a lot of the players have felt before. And I think, like you say, England showed a lot of fight. There was a lot of fight in there, but what's been exposed to me is that psychological approach to be able to play your best game under pressure, and that technical ability to cope with a couple of the world's best spinners. So, losing a game is never great. Losing a test match, as you can feel that momentum sort of ebbing away from you, is harrowing, really. But, England have had some incredible days. If we look back to the Ashes and that incredible game that Ben Stokes won up at Headingley. I mean, how would the Aussies feel after that? They thought they were going to win that game, and then to have that momentum sort of gradually pulled away from them, and for Stokes to play that heroic innings. So I think as a top international cricketer, you get used to the highs and the lows, actually, of winning and losing. And for me, if I'm ever working with a player or a coach or a business for that matter, you can't really pin all your emotions on whether you win or lose, because you're on that sort of binary, you're either a hero or a villain, and you can't that is exhausting to play that game. So I think what I would be tempted to do, and I wrote something in the Telegraph in the UK here about, we've got to try and focus on how much we're learning and how much we're progressing. So to me, going in to try and save those test matches with 3 days left, and you're facing, Patel and Ashwin on a absolute Bunsen spinner, that's going to be nigh on impossible. It really is. But if I go into the mindset that it's a foregone conclusion, then that's a waste of an amazing learning opportunity. So for me, this is about saying, what an amazing challenge. If you ask me, would I rather face 2 brilliant spinners on a spinning wicket, or 2 Australian fast bowlers bowling at 100 miles an hour in Perth? I'd say give me the spin any day. So it's not the worst challenge you can have in the world. But I think trying to see that you're progressing in your career. I know this is not what the fans want to hear, because they want to win every game. But as players and coaches, we've got to say, our average balls per innings in this match has gone up compared to where we were last time. And our methods of dismissal were better this time than they were last time. We were bowled out by good balls this test match. Last test match, we were bowled through the gate expecting spin, which means we were thinking about the ball that happened last time. So there's small sort of mental and developmental steps that I'd be trying to encourage that take you away from saying, he's a hero, he scored 100, he's a villain, he's got 3 ducks in a row. Because, Johnny Bairstow is still a very good cricketer. He just couldn't get a start. Now, that is horrendous, and it will feel like the walls were closing in around him. but he'll have his time again. And I think as a cricketer, you've got to stay resilient. You've got to focus on daily incremental steps and learning. And you've got to try and enjoy that as part of the process, because, you know, it may be that we're talking about Johnny Bairstow being England's saviour in 3 months' time. Who knows?
Absolutely. And it's almost like having the memory of a goldfish in some ways. Just forget what's happened 10 seconds ago and move on and focus on the next ball. That's what they say. It's obviously easier to say than to actually
Well,
do.
it is, but you know, this is where the role of psychology comes in, and I've actually done quite a lot of work with players. You know, and the way I try and describe it is, we tend to get used to seeing the highlights. So we see the bowler at the back of their mark, the video's been cut, the bowler starts to run up, they let go of the ball, and something happens in that moment, and then the sort of celebration, or the ball goes down to the boundary, or whatever it might be. That's the highlights. I'm not so interested in the highlights. I'm interested in the lowlights. I'm interested in, what is that bowler thinking as he or she walks back to their mark, because that sets the strategy for the next ball. So if they're berating themselves and saying, you're rubbish, you can't land it, you're not spinning it enough, or you're not swinging this new ball, this guy's going to smack you around the place, you're halfway lost already. If the batsman is again spending those 15 seconds between balls thinking, oh, it's going to go through the top, it's going to rip a glove off and I'm going to get caught later, it's just a matter of time, then again, you're not using that time effectively. So we do quite a lot with what we call performance routines, where you might remember Jonathan Trott used to scratch his mark in the crease and then step away and then twiddle his bat twice and move his thigh pad and look around. And Nick Knight used to sort of touch the top of his helmet, and Alex Stewart used to twiddle his bat 3 times. You know, so these are all the the mannerisms that the players use, but instead of them just being physical mannerisms, they should be almost like Alex Stewart saying, right, where's my boundary option? And he's spinning his bat and he's saying, right, there's definitely mid-on's gone too wide. So if he pitches full, I'm going to try and hit the ball straight back past the bowler. Are you sure about that? Yeah. Okay. So that, while that bat is up in the air, that's him doing his strategic thinking. And then what I would be saying is, as soon as that bat goes down and hits the floor in his crease, that'll be clear. And that's, so my thinking, my strategy is looking around. Yeah. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? Okay, great. Nice deep breathing to get you sort of physically composed. Think about one key strategic aim and then go clear. And in my head, at the same time that you see me hit the ground every ball, in my head, I'm thinking clear. And that's my time to switch off, focus on my breathing and watch the ball and play instinctively. That's really the key.
Interesting, because I was listening to your podcast with Stuart Broad, and he was talking about jumping 3 times, scratching his mark, and then switching off after he'd done those rituals. But to my mind, and having coached in the IPL, right, the whole narrative is around reacting to what the batsman's doing. So how would you advise a bowler who's running into bowl, who suddenly sees the batsman stepping out to bowl to him? Whereas I think that works better for Test cricket almost, whereas T20 cricket is forcing bowlers and batsmen in some way to be more reactive to what is happening around them.
It's a great question. And I think, you know, the worst case scenario, and I think anyone that's played cricket has probably been in this situation. And I think in India call it double mind. You know, I used to love that sort of phrase when I coached the Indian guys. You know, this double mind as you run up. I started off at the back of my mark thinking I'm going to bowl a bouncer. Then I run in and I get a bit confused and think halfway as I'm running along past the umpire, I might bowl a Yorker. And then I end up just floating this random ball because I'm confused, and it gets hit for 6. Now that's the mental game, and that's not being beaten by the batsman. That's being beaten by yourself. And this is where we've got to win that mental game ourselves. Now, I know lots of people, I've been beaten. I know lots of people who've been beaten by a better performer on the other end of the pitch. I don't think anyone's got any regrets with that. Our biggest regret and our biggest shame as we walk off the pitch is when we know we were thinking the wrong thing, and that's what caused our demise. You know, for the batsman who knew, you know, the ball comes down, you play across it, and all your teammates will say, oh, did that swing a little bit, or just seam off the pitch or spin? And you say, yeah, just spun a little bit. When actually you know that just before that ball, you were saying, if it's anywhere near the stumps, it's going over deep mid wicket. So that's you beating yourself, and we've all done it. And that's that inner voice. And that's the person we've got to coach. We've got to, I often, when I was working with the ICC and some of the development nations, I spoke about, under pressure, I used to go and bat in county cricket on a run chase or whatever. And then I'd feel the pressure building up and I couldn't get a single, and I'd feel this, pressure really getting too much. And then I'd just play a stupid shot and get out. And then I'd walk off the pitch, towel my sort of face down, and then I'd sit on the balcony and I'd look across to my mates who'd gone in after me. So you'd like to think they're worse batsmen than me because that's why they're batting lower. So now I'm speaking to a more inferior batsman and I'm shouting across, take your time, there's plenty of time, just get a single. I've now just played a stupid shot, sitting on the balcony, telling my mate that's gone in after me, who's worse than me, I'm telling him to calm down, there's plenty of time. So I always used to say that we've got to think like balcony boy. So we've got to have that balcony boy in our own mind when we're in the middle. It's no good when you've wiped your face and you've just made a mistake. Let's get it when we're feeling tense under pressure. So yeah, those sort of mental plans are so important. 2020, I would much rather run in with 100% conviction to bowl the best Yorker I've ever bowled. And then if somebody like Glenn Maxwell scoops it up, or Dill Shannon puts it one bounce in the crowd, fair enough. Rather than just running up, not knowing what I'm going to bowl, and then they're going to hit it anyway. So I think part of it, obviously in Test cricket, we get much more chance to dictate what we want to do with our strategy. There's a lot more cat and mouse in 2020, but even so, a bowler should be really clear and feel like they're the CEO of the game. I am in charge of the game. This game can't start until I run in. I'm going to bowl this thunderball, this rocket's going to come down and you won't be able to handle it, or it's going to spin to slip or something like that. That's what the mindset of the bowler should be, 100% commitment to being the best ball I've ever bowled in my life. And then we try and do it again after that. And the batsman should be saying, I'm in perfect balance. I've got a great game plan. And that intensity of, do I need a boundary? Where's my boundary? Or do I need to rotate the strike? That's what I think is beautiful about the game. It's the interplay between the two mindsets and the two skill sets played out live.
And the brilliance of what you've just said is the person who's come straight to my mind as balcony boy is Rahul Tewatia. Couldn't get it off the square. Everyone wanted him to monk out himself, throw it away, run himself out. And he wins the game for the Rajasthan Royals in the last IPL. Just absolutely brilliant. And as you said, it's just the people who move the slowest in the hospitals are the people that work in A&E, because they realize what the value of every minute is, how much you can fill into that minute if you don't panic. And so it's just amazing to see that. It's that's a really interesting point, and I think it leads me very neatly into my next one, which you've spoken to Stuart Broad. Obviously, he had an early setback, so to speak, when Yuvraj hit him for 6 sixes, which is again back in the news when Kieran Pollard's done the same thing to Akila Dhananjaya. Ben Stokes went for 4 sixes in the World T20 final on the biggest stage. That then came back. I mean, Stuart Broad obviously went on and took 500 Test wickets, so he's done pretty well for himself. Ben Stokes pretty much single-handedly won the World Cup final for England, and then won that incredible Test match at Headingley after that setback against Carlos Brathwaite. And Virat Kohli, averaging 13.5 in 2014, comes back, scores 593 runs in his next tour of England. So you run a podcast, Jeremy, called Inside the Mind of Champions. Now, tell us, what is inside the mind of these champions? It seems that failure seems to spur these people on and lead them to greater heights, which mere mortals may never achieve.
Well, I think that's right. And as I said, through my work and the podcast and our video, I've interviewed all these people on video, and that's available through Sporting Edge. And it's a real privilege to show people how these champions really think. And we've combined that with Harvard professors, leadership gurus from Google, neuroscientists. So that combination of how the brain works and then how these elite champions think is incredible. So for me, all the champions have definitely got a dream and an ambition that is their sort of the top of Mount Everest, if you like. But to get there, I mean, you imagine trying to climb Everest, it's incredibly steep. The oxygen is incredibly thin. You're going to fall, you're going to slip. There's ice, there's crevasses, there's rock falls, there's all sorts of, there's swamps, there's forest, at the bottom. Even to get to base camp is a good effort. So I think when you try and map out the path of a high performer, they have had to adapt themselves probably 5, 6, 8 times and overcome 10, 15 major setbacks. So what we often see is youngsters coming into an academy or a young cricket setup. There'll be thousands of kids across India whose parents are incredibly proud of, the little leg spinner that can come in and bowl, or the little left-hand batsman that plays a beautiful cover drive. Now, that hand-eye coordination or that athleticism is basically your passport into the club. Now you can come and play. That's your ticket into the game. But that's not it. We often think that those young players, all we've got to do is feed them and they're going to grow into Lionel Messi or Sachin Tendulkar, and it just doesn't work like that. So to me, it's the ability to combine natural talent with psychological tenacity that is the key. So when those two things collide, that's when you see people get to the top and stay at the top. Because if you think about it, as you come through under 11s, you're going to play in the under 13s, and those bowlers are too fast and they're too good and you're not going to score many runs. How do you cope with that? Do you say, well, I was happier in the under 9s, I'm going to go back a level and play with my young friends? Or do you say, actually, let me learn how to play against fast bowling? Then we go to the under 15s, then we go to provincial, then we go to professional, then we go to IPL. And you're now up against the best in the world, live on TV. Every one of that is like a step in a staircase. And you're going to slide back down and go back up, slide back down and go back up. So, as I've said before, judging yourself by the outcome of being player of the year, it's not possible all the time. So we have to see that we're developing. We have to see that we're adapting. We have to surround ourselves with people that can coach us and we can learn from. And that ability to bounce back from a setback, that's what you're looking for as a coach. Are they hungry for feedback, or do they already know better? I was coaching some 12-year-old children. I live in a little village in the middle of England, and we didn't play cricket last summer, but the year before I was coaching some 10 and 11-year-old kids, and we were just going through the basic bowling action. It's a tiny little village ground. And this one little boy says to me, I'm not practicing my bowling, I'm a wicket keeper. Now I said to him, you're 10 years old, you'll be doing some bowling. You could end up being the next Brett Lee or something. He's 10, he's like as high as the pads. But in his mind, he was fixed, he was a wicket keeper, and that was the end of it. And I said to him, well, go and sit by that tree then. And then when we do 5 minutes wicket keeping at the end, you can come and join us. But to me, it's all about exposing kids, exposing people to challenges. If I was coaching with the England cricket team over the last couple of months, I'd have made sure that the net facilities were 10 times worse than the pitch, because you want people to practice in those extreme environments that almost force you to fail. Because when you're forced to fail, you are forced to be innovative and come up with a new technique. And as you gradually try and hone that new technique and get to mastery of that new technique, then it takes so much more to be thrown at you during a match to break you. And I think, overload training, as long as it's done in short doses and it's not all, soul destroying and confidence breaking, is a really important part.
Absolutely, and of course, you learn more from failure than success in some ways. But the three players I mentioned earlier, Stuart Broad, Stokes, and Kohli, all have something else in common apart from being absolute champions at cricket. And they all like a good sledge, and we're called Edges and Sledges. And sledging was called mental disintegration by the Aussies, I think, back in the day. Now, I'd be interested in hearing why you think sledging kind of affects some players badly, and I'm thinking perhaps badly in terms of performance, someone like Mind the Windows Tino or Amir Sohail, and it seems to spur other people on. I mean, Flintoff, as you mentioned on your podcast, had a few words with Yuvraj before the 6 sixes were inflicted on poor 20-year-old Stuart Broad back then. So let's talk a little bit about sledging. And were you a big sledger when you were playing?
I wouldn't like to say that I was a sledger in terms of abuse, but I was. I would like to have been distracting and annoying. I think that would have been a claim to fame. I think,
Rishabh
yeah,
Pant like, basically.
yes, probably. So yeah, I used to field at gully or backward points. So I was always sort of chirping in with something about somebody's grip or stance or backlift, or that they'd changed it since last match, or that kind of stuff, or a bit of off the field sort of story that you've heard was always good fun. But I think, first of all, again, it's self-awareness. What sort of arousal level do you play your best game at? Now, for some people, they almost need to be in a fight. So with those kind of players, I'd be saying, as you're walking onto the pitch, like an Andrew Simons kind of, you'd be looking for somebody to sort of spark off and have a bit of, adrenaline that gets you going, because then you really want to show them who's the boss. So that might work. For other players, you're actually better being incredibly calm. You can imagine somebody like Raoul Dravid never getting flustered. So I think, first of all, you've got to understand that. And on the chirpers side, you've got to understand, who am I up against here? And I would say that, some of those great players, you're wasting your time if you say anything. So you're better off being complimentary and hope that they get complacent, saying, God, you're in great form. I've been, I saw your new website. It looks amazing. And, God, you're doing really well off the field and stuff, and this bat looks amazing. It sounds brilliant today. You're in fantastic form today, almost going the other way and hoping they get complacent. So that's one sort of reverse psychology. And then with other players, it might be a young player and, and sort of asking them, the sort of, this is your one chance, you've got to take this chance today and ramp the pressure up on them. But ultimately, all that is trying to do is, they have got their own perfect level of arousal and adrenaline, and they have got their own perfect self-talk loop. Like I said, that sort of time between balls where they're thinking their key thoughts, they're reinforcing their key strategy. And all you're trying to do is get in the way of that and get them to say something to you or do something to you, or to, like Tino with the windows, I'll show you kind of thing. And it takes them out of that little bubble that they play best in. And then they come to you and they play a rash shot or whatever. But, for as many of those, hilarious moments where you chirp somebody out and it makes it helps with a big wicket, there's been many, many stories like the Yuvraj Singh one, where you say where, a player has been chirped and it's backfired horribly, and you end up losing the game. And that handshake at the end of the game is probably one of the, the best things you'll ever do. So it's, you've got to be careful with your sledges. Make sure you do get the edges.
Yeah, to be fair to Freddie, he did get Yuvraj at the end of that innings, caught it long off, but there was the intervening over for Broad. Speaking of Kohli, obviously there's a lot of chat in India about Kohli and his captaincy. There's a lot of chat, surprisingly, in England about Kohli's captaincy. People don't seem to rate him as a captain, having watched Rahane kind of take over the team in Australia, and I mean, frankly, pull us out from the depths of 36 all out and win that Test series lead, which contributed towards the World Test Championship final, which India are now playing. But Jeremy, you've got a great podcast on leadership, but what for you actually defines leaders, and can you have different leaders who are equally effective? To my mind, someone like Kohli is as effective as a Rahane. They just have different leadership styles.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the case. Now, there are, a leader needs to be, inspirational and create followers. Ultimately, do the team follow that leader, that captain? Now, they can do that because the player is bombastic and, goes out and leads from the front and is sort of swashbuckling, and you want to follow that player to be like them. You can follow them because you're scared of them and they're controlling and dominant. Or you can follow them because they are like you. They don't see themselves as a leader. They're just one of your friends that wants you to do well, and that unlocks the best in you. So, there's been thousands of books written about leadership and lots of theory. But for me, I think India are in a fantastic position that you've got two leaders. Now, it's probably a little bit unfair to compare Kohli's, period of leadership. I don't know how many tests he's led India to, but it's significant, versus Rahane with just that short example of his leadership. And it was almost like a fairy tale, wasn't it? Australia looking dominant, India, down on their luck, and Rahane comes in like the mercurial leader, softly spoken, and whips them up into a frenzy, and does it with such a soft touch. It looks beautiful. But would that style of leadership work for a 5-year reign? When you are playing away from home, when you are tired and frustrated, and you need somebody with passion and spirit to try and drive relentlessly day after day, which to me is what Kohli brings. So I think, for me, if I was looking at India, I'd say you're blessed actually that you've got the fire and brimstone and passion of Kohli that's pretty much, set there. And you've also got a lieutenant who is a wonderful guy, inspirational in a very different way, and who's shown that he's a master tactician and able to step up whenever he's needed. So I think it's a good position to be in.
A song of ice and fire. But Jeremy, I want to be respectful of time. So it's been absolutely amazing speaking to you. And we could, as you say, go on for ages just talking about things like the butterflies in your stomach when you walk into bat, and how bowlers get the yips, and how we talk about controlling the controllables, what being in the zone is. But we could probably do an entire podcast on that at some other time. But I just wanted to thank you for making the time to speak to us. It's been absolutely amazing. The insight you brought to Edges and Sledges is brilliant. Can you tell our listeners what you're doing at the moment with Sporting Edge? And obviously we spoke about leadership, but some of those lessons can be transposed directly into kind of the world of business and the corporate world in which a lot of us work.
Yeah, absolutely. So Sporting Edge is all about taking those insights from the world's top thinkers and performers. And we've got a video library that we license out as part of our membership. And we've got hundreds of people joining us as members around the world. So entrepreneurs, coaches, athletes, some incredible people. So I've interviewed around 100 people, and all their videos sit in there. That's what the podcast Inside the Mind of Champions showcases. So you've mentioned people like Stuart Broad, Viv Richards, Shane Warne that I worked with at the Rajasthan Royals. He's given us a great interview. We've got Viv Richards, Dale Steyn, Graham Smith, Gary Kirsten. So who couldn't learn from Gary Kirsten and some of these great coaches? Because that ability to get the best out of yourself is a skill. That ability to create the environment in a team to do well is a great skill. And that ability to create an environment or an organization that has high performance characteristics is a great skill. So that's where I'm fascinated. And I guess with, all these different stories on things like trust and conflict and goal setting and future-proofing yourself with strategy, all of those bits of Lego click together and create a fascinating coaching tool for webinars and speeches. So I absolutely love India. I'd be desperate to come out whenever we can get back on the aeroplanes and speak at conferences or come and do some work in cricket. But I'd just like to say hello to everyone out there, and let's hope we get some great cricket in the weeks to come.
Absolutely brilliant. And I look forward to seeing you out there. Thank you again, Jeremy, for making the time. It has been a very, very interesting podcast into the mental side of cricket, which we often don't talk about. We talk about averages and strike rates, and we talk about how many dot balls somebody's bowled, but we don't talk about what goes on between people's ears, right? So this has been absolutely fascinating for us. So thank you so much. Good luck with everything with Sporting Edge. Guys, do check out Inside the Mind of Champions. There's some fantastic interviews on there. I would particularly recommend the ones with Stuart Broad and Sir Viv Richards. Just genuinely an insight into the mind of champions. So well named. And guys, that is a wrap on this show. Thank you so much for joining us. And Jeremy, we will speak to you again soon, hopefully.
Great stuff. Thanks very much.
And there you have it, guys. That was an incredible chat with Jeremy Snape. I hope you enjoyed listening to it as much as I actually enjoyed having the conversation with Jeremy. Just a fascinating character, lots and lots of stories. We couldn't even get into half the stuff I had planned for him. He's actually the inventor of something called the moon ball. So hopefully we'll have him back soon to talk more about that, talk more about cricket and psychology and all the fascinating stuff he's doing. As always, you can reach us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We are at the handle One Tip One Hand. That's the number one tip, the number one hand. You can email us at contact@onetiponehand.com. And guys, leave us a review. I know there's lots of you listening to us out there. Leave us a review, give us a rating. It'll help grow this incredible Edges and Sledges community that we're building. This is the Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast, brought to you by SEAT, signing off for the week. And we will see you next week with the India T20s. Until then, drive safe, guys.